Rot in jail, Mom, while we enjoy every dollar you left behind. The words cut deeper than the cold metal biting into my wrists. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as the handcuffs snapped shut, but all I could hear was my son's voice. Lucas Whitmore, the boy I once rocked to sleep, now smiling as if this were a celebration. At 70 years old, my legs trembled beneath me, yet I refused to collapse. Not here, not in front of him. Lucas stood beside his wife, Vanessa, her manicured hand wrapped tightly around his arm. She leaned in and whispered something that made him laugh, a loud, cruel sound that echoed through the courtroom. Vanessa's lips curved into a victorious smile, the kind worn by someone who believes the battle is already won. The judge slammed the gavel. Order, but it didn't matter. The sentence had already been read. 3 years in federal prison. Financial fraud, embezzlement, crimes I never committed. Crimes carefully crafted using forged documents, fabricated bank records, and rehearsed lies that painted me as a greedy old woman stealing from her own son. Lucas and Vanessa rose together, arrogance in every step as they walked toward the exit. Before disappearing through the heavy wooden doors, Vanessa turned back and met my eyes. What stared back at me wasn't relief or triumph. It was contempt. To her, I was nothing more than an obstacle finally removed. The deputy tugged my arm, forcing me forward. Pain shot through my knees, but I swallowed it down. I had endured childbirth, widowhood, and decades of sacrifice I would not break now. As I was led out of the courtroom, whispers followed me. Some faces showed pity, others showed disgust. An old family friend avoided my gaze entirely. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and despair. Shoes squeaked against worn linoleum as we passed others being processed, some crying, some hollow-eyed, all defeated. But I wasn't defeated. Not yet. We stopped in a small, windowless holding room. Plastic chairs were bolted to the floor. The paint peeled from the walls. Behind a metal desk sat an older correctional officer, his uniform immaculate despite the exhaustion etched into his face. His name tag read, Samuel Reed. He reviewed my file slowly, brow furrowed. There was something different about him. His eyes weren't cruel, just tired. The escorting officer handed him my paperwork and left. The door shut with a heavy thud. Silence. I sat down carefully, feeling every one of my 70 years. The cuffs were still on, warm now against my skin. My thoughts raced, each one more painful than the last. My son had done this. The same child I raised alone after his father died of a heart attack. The boy I defended when teachers complained. The man I trusted simply because he was my blood. And now he was outside, probably celebrating with champagne, already planning how to spend my savings, my home, my life's work. Officer Reed sighed and leaned back in his chair. Transport will be here in about 20 minutes, Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently. Would you like some water, kindness? On a day like this, it almost broke me. Yes, I whispered. As he stood and turned toward the water dispenser, my heart began to pound. This was it. Slowly, so slowly, I slid my hand into the inner pocket of my dull gray jacket. I'd worn it throughout the trial, knowing no one would search an old woman's coat carefully. My fingers closed around a small folded square of paper. My last hope. When Officer Reed's back was fully turned, I placed the note on his desk beside my case file, positioning it carefully so it looked official, important. My pulse thundered in my ears. He returned with the water and handed it to me. I drank, forcing myself to appear calm, even as every nerve screamed. Officer Reed sat down. His eyes fell on the paper. Confusion flickered across his face as he picked it up and unfolded it. I watched every expression as his gaze scanned the words. His eyebrows lifted. His mouth parted slightly. Shock washed over him. He looked up at me, eyes suddenly sharp. Charles Kingsley, he whispered. That Charles Kingsley, I nodded once. Slow, certain. The room seemed to shrink around us. Because my son believed I was alone. He believed no one would come for me, and that was the biggest mistake he would ever make. Officer Reed hadn't asked yet, but when he finally made that phone call, everything my son thought he owned was about to crumble. Officer Samuel Reed stared at the note as if it might burst into flames in his hands. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the room, punctuated by the distant clang of metal doors somewhere down the corridor. I could see the struggle playing out on his face, logic wrestling with disbelief, caution battling something far more dangerous, hope. He folded the paper once, then unfolded it again as if rereading it might somehow change the words. Charles Kingsley, he murmured, quieter now. You're saying you're married to him? Yes, I replied softly. And my son has no idea. Samuel leaned back in his chair, running a hand down his weathered face. Years of routine had taught him to distrust stories like mine. Holding cells were full of desperate people spinning lies to delay the inevitable, but desperate lies didn't come written on calm paper, and desperate liars didn't meet your gaze without blinking. How long? He asked. 6 months, his breath caught. And no one knows. No one who matters, I said. Not yet. Samuel stood and walked a few steps away, then stopped, gripping the edge of the desk. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of decades suddenly pressed down on him all at once. You know what kind of trouble this could get me into, he said. Making calls for inmates, delaying transfers. I know, I answered. That's why I didn't ask for charity. He turned back toward me. You offered a house, he said carefully. A new life. I offered honesty, I corrected. The house is his decision. But if you make that call, if you give my husband the chance to know what's happening, your life will change, and so will mine. Samuel studied me, searching for cracks, tremors, anything that might reveal a lie. Instead, he found only exhaustion and resolve. I have a daughter, he said suddenly. Her name is Lydia, she's 26, 2 kids, husband walked out last year. I stayed silent, listening. She and the kids live with my wife and me in a 2-bedroom apartment, he continued. My wife's sick. Medication costs more than we earn some months. I work double shifts just to keep the lights on. His voice broke. So if this is a lie, he said, eyes hard now, you're not just wasting my time, you're playing with my family's survival. I leaned forward as far as the cuffs allowed. Then don't believe me, I said calmly. Verify me. Samuel exhaled sharply. He opened the desk drawer and pulled out an old phone, scratched screen, cracked case. His thumb hovered over the keypad. This call, he said, changes everything for both of us. Yes, I agreed, it does. He dialed. Each ring felt like a hammer strike against my chest. 1 ring, 2, Samuel glanced at me, doubt creeping back in. 3 rings, then Kingsley, came the voice on the other end. Calm, controlled, powerful, Samuel nearly dropped the phone. Mr. Kingsley, he stammered. My name is Samuel Reed. I'm a correctional officer at the County Justice Center. I am calling because, he paused, looking at me. Because your wife asked me to. The silence on the line was absolute, then suddenly the voice changed. Eleanor, Charles Kingsley said sharply. What happened to Eleanor? Samuel swallowed. She's here with me, sir. She was convicted this morning, sentenced to 3 years. The reaction was instant. Convicted? Charles roared. For what? Samuel handed me the phone. My hands shook as I pressed it to my ear. Charles, I whispered. I'm so sorry, I should have told you everything sooner. There was no anger in his reply, only fear. Where are you? He demanded. Who did this to you? Lucas, I said, the name tasting like poison. He accused me of fraud, used forged documents, they believed him. Silence again, but this time it was lethal. They're transferring her in 15 minutes, Samuel said quickly. No, Charles replied, voice turning razor sharp. They are not. Samuel stiffened. Listen carefully, Officer Reed, Charles continued. In less than 10 minutes, a judge will receive an emergency motion. My wife is not moving anywhere. If she does, every person involved will answer to me personally. Samuel went pale. Yes, sir, the call ended. We sat in stunned silence. 7 minutes later, the desk phone rang. Samuel answered and froze. When he hung up, he looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. Transfer has been halted, he said quietly. Temporary stay issued. I closed my eyes. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Because somewhere out there, my son was still celebrating, and he had no idea the storm that had just been unleashed. But stopping the transfer was only the beginning, because what Charles Kingsley planned next would destroy my son's world in ways he never imagined. Samuel Reed lowered himself into the chair across from me, his hands still trembling slightly. I've worked this job for 32 years, he said quietly. I've seen every kind of lie desperation can invent, but this, he shook his head, this is something else. The holding room felt different now. The walls hadn't changed, the lights still flickered, but the air itself seemed charged, alive with possibility. Charles Kingsley was coming. Samuel cleared his throat. If you don't mind me asking, he said carefully, how does a woman end up married to one of the most powerful men in the state without her own son knowing? I closed my eyes. The memory came easily, too easily. Because loneliness teaches you to keep miracles quiet, I said. 6 months earlier, I had been a widow living in silence. My days were predictable, garden in the morning, television in the evening, empty dinners at a table set for one. Lucas rarely visited. When he did, he was distracted, always checking his phone, always in a hurry. After Vanessa entered his life, the visits nearly stopped altogether. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I'd gone to an art exhibition downtown at the insistence of a friend. I didn't want to go. Crowds made me uncomfortable, but standing there alone, staring at a painting of sunflowers, I felt a presence beside me, Charles Kingsley. At the time, I didn't know his name. He was elegant but not loud, silver hair neatly combed, suit perfectly tailored. His eyes held a sadness I recognized, the quiet grief of someone who had loved deeply and lost. We spoke about the painting, about gardens, about grief. Coffee became dinner, dinner became walks through the park. Laughter returned to my life in places I thought had gone numb forever. He told me who he was early on, I said to Samuel. Told me everything, his wealth, his enemies, the risks. Charles had lost his wife to cancer years before. Since then, his life had been a constant balancing act between power and protection. He warned me there were people who would use anyone close to him as leverage, so he asked for discretion. We married quietly, I continued. 2 witnesses, no announcements, no headlines. Samuel's eyes widened. Your son didn't know? I planned to tell him, I said softly. I truly did, I just wanted the timing to be right. But time betrayed me. 3 months ago, Lucas appeared at my house unannounced. Vanessa followed, her eyes scanning every corner like an appraiser inspecting property. They asked questions too many. How much money I had saved, what investments I owned, whether the house was fully paid off. When Lucas asked for a loan, I agreed $10,000, then 20, then more. Each time came new excuses, new emergencies. I stopped saying yes. That was when everything changed. They brought documents, I said, told me it was for tax protection, family restructuring. Samuel muttered something under his breath. I asked for a lawyer, I continued. Lucas accused me of not trusting him. Vanessa cried, and I signed. My voice shook. 2 weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit. My own son accused me of stealing from him. Samuel's jaw tightened. They altered the documents, I said, created fake bank records, witnesses, emails I never sent. And your husband? Samuel asked. He was overseas, I didn't tell him, I thought I could fix it myself. Silence filled the room. Samuel finally spoke. Your son thought you were alone. Yes, he thought no one would fight for you. Yes, Samuel leaned forward. But he was wrong. The door opened. 2 men entered, both wearing dark suits and expressions that suggested the world bent around them rather than the other way around. Then Charles walked in. I stood, or tried to. My knees gave out and he was there instantly, kneeling in front of me, uncaring that his $1,000 suit touched the dirty floor. My love, he whispered, I'm here. The dam broke. I should have told you, I sobbed. I was afraid. Don't, he said gently. None of this is your fault. He stood and turned to the men behind him. I want every document reviewed, he said calmly. Every witness investigated, and I want to know exactly how my wife ended up in chains. One of the men smiled, a predator's smile. Already started, he said, and what we're finding doesn't look good for her son. Charles turned back to me. Lucas believes he won, he said quietly. Tonight he's celebrating. I looked up at him. Then tonight, I said, voice steady despite the tears, he learns the truth. Because while my son toasted his victory, the evidence that would destroy him was already being uncovered. The moment Charles Kingsley took my hand, the world shifted, not because the room changed, but because everyone inside it suddenly understood who held control now. Samuel Reed stepped aside respectfully as Charles guided me to a chair, his hand never leaving mine. One of the suited men placed a thick folder on the metal desk and opened a laptop, already pulling up files. This should have never gone to trial, the man said flatly. And it definitely should never have ended in a conviction. Samuel swallowed. You're saying this case is broken? Corrupt, Charles corrected calmly. He turned to me. Eleanor, I need you to listen carefully. What happens next may feel overwhelming, but you are safe. No one is moving you, not tonight, not ever again. For the first time since the handcuffs snapped shut in the courtroom, I allowed myself to believe him. The suited man introduced himself. Victor Hale, Criminal Defense. I recognized the name instantly, one I'd heard whispered in legal circles for years, a man who dismantled impossible cases. Victor tapped the screen. Your son made mistakes, small ones, the kind arrogant people always make when they think they've already won. He pulled up documents, bank statements, transaction logs, email chains. These, he said, are fabricated, dates don't align, metadata doesn't match the narrative presented in court. I felt a tightness in my chest. They told the jury it was airtight. Victor smiled thinly. Juries believe confidence, not truth. Charles's jaw tightened. Where is Lucas right now? He asked. Victor checked his phone. Private club downtown, champagne, speeches. He's announcing a new investment firm using money he doesn't legally own. Of course he was. He thinks I'm gone, I whispered, that I'll spend years behind bars while he spends my life savings. Charles leaned down so our eyes met. He underestimated 2 things, he said, your strength and my patience. Within hours, everything moved. A temporary release order was signed. My conviction was stayed pending review. Surveillance teams were dispatched. Financial forensics began tearing through every account Lucas had touched. By midnight, I was no longer a prisoner. I was a protected witness. They took me to one of Charles's properties, a gated estate outside the city, guarded, silent, impossibly beautiful. It felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's life. Inside, warm lights glowed. Clean clothes awaited me. Food, privacy. I stood in the guest bedroom, staring at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back. Rest, Charles said softly, standing behind me. Tomorrow we fight. But sleep didn't come. I kept seeing Lucas's face in court, the laughter, the confidence, the certainty that he had erased me. Around dawn, Victor returned with news. They found a witness, he said, an accountant who helped fabricate the documents. My breath caught. He's talking. He's terrified, Victor replied. Your son stopped paying him, promised protection he never delivered. Charles folded his arms. Bring him in. By afternoon, the man sat across from us, Andrew Collins, pale, shaking, drenched in guilt. I didn't think it would go this far, he sobbed. I was told it was just paperwork, adjustments. Victor leaned forward. Who hired you? Vanessa, Andrew said instantly. She planned everything. Lucas just followed her lead. The words hurt more than I expected. My son hadn't been tricked. He agreed. Victor activated the recorder. Tell us everything. Andrew did. Fake accounts. Forged statements. False testimonies. A plan designed to remove me permanently. By evening, the case had turned. Charges were prepared, arrest warrants drafted, and then Victor delivered the final blow. There's a celebration tonight, he said. Your son invited investors, family, friends. I looked at Charles. He met my gaze, eyes dark. Do you want justice, he asked, or closure? I straightened. I want him to see me, I said, free, standing, alive. Charles nodded once. Then let's attend his party. Because my son's celebration was about to become his public downfall, and I would be there to watch it happen. The private club glittered like a palace of glass and gold. Valets lined the entrance. Laughter spilled out onto the street. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors as men in tailored suits and women in evening gowns raised their glasses in celebration. This was Lucas's moment. Or so he believed. From the back seat of the black sedan, I watched guests stream inside, each one unknowingly stepping into the final act of my son's carefully staged performance. Investors, socialites, former friends who hadn't called me once during my trial. I adjusted the shawl around my shoulders, my pulse steady in a way that surprised me. Charles sat beside me, calm and unreadable. Once we step inside, he said quietly, there's no turning back. I've already been buried once, I replied. I'm not afraid of the dirt anymore. The car stopped. Security recognized Charles instantly and stepped aside without question. Heads turned as we entered, whispers rippling through the room like a sudden draft. Then Lucas saw me. The champagne flute slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. For a split second, he looked like a child caught in a lie, eyes wide, color draining from his face. Vanessa froze beside him, her smile stiffening as if painted on too quickly. Mom. Lucas whispered as though he were seeing a ghost. The room fell quiet. I walked forward slowly, deliberately, every step echoing across the marble. Hello, Lucas, I said. Lovely party. Vanessa recovered first. This is a mistake, she snapped. You're supposed to be in prison, I finished calmly. Yes, that was the plan, wasn't it? Murmurs spread. Lucas glanced around, panic flickering behind his eyes. She's manipulating you all, he said loudly. She's a criminal, convicted. Charles stepped forward. That conviction has been stayed, he said evenly, pending investigation into fabricated evidence. The words hit like a thunderclap. Victor Hale emerged from the crowd, flanked by two uniformed officers. Andrew Collins followed, head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. This man, Victor announced, has provided sworn testimony detailing how this fraud was orchestrated. Andrew swallowed hard. Vanessa planned it. Lucas approved it. I altered the records under their instruction. The room erupted. Vanessa screamed. He's lying, he's doing this to save himself. Victor held up a hand. The bank records say otherwise, so does the metadata, and so do the witnesses. Lucas backed away, shaking his head. You can't do this here, not in front of everyone. That's exactly where we're doing it, I said softly. He turned to me, eyes wild. Why are you doing this? I met his gaze. Because you didn't just steal my money, I said. You tried to erase me. The officers stepped forward. Lucas Whitmore, one said, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and perjury. Vanessa screamed again as handcuffs clicked shut, first around Lucas's wrists, then hers. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. Conversations exploded. As they were led away, Lucas looked back at me, his voice breaking. You were supposed to be gone. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You should have made sure I was truly alone. They disappeared into the elevator, their world collapsing behind them. The room buzzed with shock and whispers, but I felt strangely calm. The rage I'd carried for months began to loosen its grip. Charles took my hand. It's not over, he said. There will be trials, public scrutiny. I know, I replied, but tonight the truth walked into the light. As we turned to leave, Victor stopped us. One more thing, he said quietly. We found something else. My heart skipped. What? Victor's expression darkened. The money they stole, it was just the beginning. Because what Victor uncovered next revealed a deeper betrayal, one that went far beyond money and straight into blood. The drive back to the estate was silent. City lights blurred past the windows, but my mind was fixed on Victor's words. It was just the beginning. Charles noticed my grip tightening around the edge of my coat. Victor wouldn't say that unless it mattered, he said gently. But whatever it is, we face it together. I nodded, though a knot had formed deep in my stomach. When we arrived, Victor was already waiting in Charles's study. Files covered the desk, photographs spread like fallen cards. The atmosphere was heavier than before, less triumphant, more cautious. This goes beyond fraud, Victor said the moment we entered. And it changes how we proceed. He slid a folder toward me. Inside were financial ledgers, wire transfer logs, and something that made my breath stop, copies of insurance policies. My name was printed across the top. Life insurance, high value, recent. I never authorized this, I whispered. Victor nodded. You didn't, Lucas did, 2 months ago. Cold spread through my chest. Beneficiaries? Charles asked sharply. Victor hesitated. Lucas and Vanessa, equal shares. The room seemed to tilt. He insured my life, I said slowly, while framing me for crimes. Yes, Victor replied, and the policy includes a clause that pays out even if death occurs during incarceration. Charles's expression hardened into something dangerous. This wasn't just about money, I said, voice barely audible. It was about removing me permanently. Victor exhaled. There's more. He revealed surveillance stills, grainy but clear enough to recognize faces. Luca's meeting with unfamiliar men in parking garages. Vanessa handing over envelopes. These men, Victor said, are connected to an offshore laundering operation. We believe your son planned to move assets out of the country once you were incarcerated or worse. The word worse hung in the air. Samuel Reed's face flashed through my mind. The holding cell, the cuffs, if not for that note, I closed my eyes. They were waiting, I said, for me to disappear. Charles placed a steady hand on my shoulder. You didn't, Victor leaned forward. This shifts the case from financial fraud to attempted conspiracy causing bodily harm. It also raises the stakes. How so? I asked. People who plan this deeply don't stop easily, Victor said, and desperation makes them reckless. As if summoned by his words, Charles's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, jaw tightening. They made bail. My heart dropped. Already, money buys time, he said. Not freedom. Victor nodded. But it means they're out there. The next morning, the media exploded. Headlines screamed betrayal. Interviews replayed footage from the party. Analysts debated how a respected woman nearly vanished into the system while her son smiled for cameras. But something darker began to surface, anonymous tips, old employees coming forward, whispers of a pattern, people Lucas had used, people Vanessa had ruined. Then the threat arrived. A simple envelope. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, my front gate, taken at night, and 3 words written in red ink, stay quiet or else. Charles read it once and handed it to Victor. They're panicking, Victor said. Good, but panic made people dangerous. Security was doubled, cameras installed, movements restricted. That night, as I stood by the window watching guards patrol the grounds, the weight of it all finally pressed down on me. I raised him, I whispered. How did he become capable of this? Charles joined me. Power reveals what's already there, he said softly. It doesn't create it. I turned to him. Will justice be enough? I asked. After this, Charles met my gaze, unwavering. It won't just be justice, he said. It will be accountability. Outside, headlights slowed near the gate, then sped away. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, because whatever Lucas and Vanessa had planned next, they weren't done yet. And as night fell, I realized the most dangerous part of my son's plan was still waiting to be exposed. Sleep became impossible after the threat. Every sound outside the estate felt amplified, the crunch of gravel, the distant hum of engines, even the wind brushing against the iron gates. I had lived long enough to recognize fear when it arrived quietly, pretending to be caution. Charles refused to leave my side. By morning, Victor arrived with grim determination etched across his face. "We're accelerating everything," he said, "before they try something desperate." He wasn't wrong. Within hours, investigators uncovered a pattern, one that stretched far beyond my own case. Lucas's name appeared again and again in sealed complaints, quietly settled disputes, and non-disclosure agreements paid for with suspicious funds. These people were silenced, Victor explained, spreading files across the table. Employees accused of theft, partners blamed for losses. Even a former caregiver you fired years ago. My hands trembled. "I never fired anyone." "You didn't," Victor replied. "Lucas did, using your name." The realization hit me harder than any courtroom sentence ever had. My son hadn't just stolen from me, he had been hiding behind me. "Once you were removed," Victor continued, "there would be no one left to question the narrative. You would have taken every accusation to the grave." A knock interrupted us. Samuel Reed stepped inside, his expression urgent. "You need to see this," he said. He turned on the television. Breaking news filled the screen. A woman stood before reporters, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "My name is Laura Bennett," she said. "I worked for Lucas Whitmore's firm. When I discovered irregular transfers, I was blamed, fired, and threatened." More faces followed. More stories. A floodgate had opened. By noon, prosecutors announced expanded charges: obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, attempted financial coercion. And then came the final blow. Victor received a call and put it on speaker. "Mr. Hale," the voice said, "we've confirmed it. The insurance policy wasn't the only one." Victor's eyes darkened. "Go on." "There was a contingency plan. If Mrs. Whitmore died or disappeared, the estate would have transferred to a holding company controlled by Lucas and Vanessa." Went silent. "They didn't just want her money," Samuel whispered. "They wanted her erased." I closed my eyes, fighting back the wave of grief. How long had my son been planning this? That evening, Charles insisted we step outside, just briefly, into the garden. The air was cool, scented with jasmine. For the first time in days, I felt something loosen inside my chest. "You survived," Charles said softly. "That matters." Before I could answer, headlights appeared beyond the gate. Victor's phone rang. "They're here," he said calmly. "And this time, they're not leaving." Police vehicles flooded the driveway. Officers moved with purpose. Lucas and Vanessa were taken into custody again, this time without cameras, without speeches, without champagne, no bail. As they passed me, Lucas looked smaller than I remembered. "Mom," he whispered, "please." I searched his face for the boy I once knew and found nothing. "Tell the truth," I said quietly, "for once." He was led away without another word. That night, the house was quiet again, but not with fear, with finality. Yet even as relief settled in, Victor's voice echoed in my mind: contingency plan. Because plans like that always had layers. And somewhere beneath all this ruin, there was still one unanswered question. Because the final layer of my son's deception wasn't about money or power, it was about a secret that could destroy him forever. The question haunted me through the night. What secret could still remain after everything, after the fraud, the threats, the attempt to erase me completely? Victor arrived just after sunrise, his face grim in a way I hadn't seen before. "We found it," he said, "the final layer." Charles stiffened beside me. "Tell us." Victor placed a single file on the table, thinner than the others, older. "This was buried deliberately," he continued. "Sealed through a private family court order nearly 35 years ago." My breath caught. Family court. Victor nodded. "It involves Lucas's birth." The room felt suddenly too small. I had given birth alone after my husband's sudden death. I remembered the hospital, the antiseptic smell, the exhaustion, the overwhelming fear that I might not be enough for my child. "What about it?" I asked. Victor opened the file. Inside was a DNA report, not mine, not my late husband's. Another name stared back at me: Daniel Cross. Charles's jaw tightened. "That name appears in our investigation." Victor nodded. "A convicted financial manipulator, offshore accounts, identity laundering, disappeared 28 years ago." My heart began to pound. "What are you saying?" Victor spoke carefully. "Daniel Cross was present at the hospital the night Lucas was born, listed under an alias. He signed a confidential agreement days later." The truth landed like a physical blow. "You're saying," my voice cracked, "Lucas isn't your husband's biological son," Victor finished quietly. The world tilted. Memories rushed in, moments I had brushed aside, questions I had never asked. Why Lucas never resembled his father, why certain traits felt unfamiliar. "I didn't know," I whispered. Victor nodded. "You couldn't have, the deception was meticulous." Daniel Cross vanished shortly afterward, but his financial footprint remained. Charles leaned forward. "And Lucas, raised by you," Victor said. "Loved, protected, given everything." I felt tears slide down my face, not from betrayal this time, but from grief. I loved him, I said. No matter what, Victor's voice softened. And that's what makes this devastating. The investigation uncovered the final connection. Daniel Cross had resurfaced years ago under shell identities, feeding Luca's advice, resources, guidance. A ghost father, teaching him how to manipulate, how to hide money, how to disappear people. Lucas hadn't just betrayed me, he had followed a legacy. This explains the confidence, Charles said quietly. The planning, the lack of remorse, Victor nodded. And it explains why this case escalated so quickly. He was finishing what his biological father started. The prosecution amended the charges again: conspiracy across decades, coordinated financial crimes, inherited criminal enterprise. That afternoon, I was asked a question no mother should ever face. Would you testify? The prosecutor said, knowing what this will expose. Looked at Charles, then at Victor, then inward. I will, I said, because silence is what allowed this to grow. The courtroom was packed when the hearing began. Cameras lined the walls. Lucas sat behind the defense table, shackled, his expression unreadable. When the DNA evidence was presented, a ripple moved through the room. Lucas's mask cracked. He turned toward me, eyes blazing. You think this changes anything? He hissed. You still raised me. Yes, I replied softly. And that's why I'm here. The judge called for order. As proceedings adjourned, Victor leaned toward me. There's one more hearing, he said, and one final truth. My stomach tightened. What truth? Victor's eyes darkened. The one Lucas has been hiding from everyone, including himself. Because in the final hearing, my son would face the one thing he could never manipulate, the truth about who he really was. The final hearing began under a heavy sky. Rain streaked the courthouse windows as if the building itself were mourning what was about to unfold. Inside, the air was tense, thick with anticipation, regret, and something darker. Lucas sat at the defense table, hands folded, face carefully blank. But I could see it now, the cracks beneath the surface. The confidence that once fueled him had curdled into defiance. This time, there was no Vanessa beside him. She had taken a plea deal that morning. When the prosecutor announced it, Lucas's head snapped up, disbelief flashing across his face. She testified, he whispered. Victor leaned toward me. She gave them everything. The judge entered. The room rose, then fell back into silence. The prosecution began slowly, methodically laying out the decades-long pattern of deception. Financial crimes tied to Daniel Cross. The grooming. The transfer of knowledge, assets, and intent from father to son. Then came the testimony. Witness after witness stepped forward. Former employees, financial analysts, victims who had been silenced for years, and finally me. I walked to the stand with steady steps. The oath felt heavy on my tongue. The prosecutor asked gentle questions at first, about my life, my husband, raising Lucas alone. Then the tone shifted. Did you ever knowingly defraud your son? No. Did you ever authorize forged documents or false testimony? Never. Did you know Lucas was planning to profit from your incarceration or death? My voice trembled, but I answered clearly. No, but I know that now. The defense rose. Lucas's attorney approached sharp-eyed. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you benefited from your relationship with Charles Kingsley? Yes, I said, in love and protection, not in crime. And you hid this marriage from your son. I protected it, I replied, because power invites predators. Lucas laughed suddenly, a brittle sound. So now you're the victim, he snapped. You raised me, you taught me to survive. The judge slammed the gavel. Order, I turned toward my son. I taught you kindness, I said softly, and you chose cruelty. The courtroom fell silent. Then the prosecutor delivered the final evidence. A recorded call. Daniel Cross's voice crackled through the speakers, older now, weaker but unmistakable. You're ready, the voice said. Finish it. Once she's gone, everything becomes yours. Lucas's face drained of color. Ended? Silence roared. Lucas stood abruptly. That's not. Sit down, the judge commanded. For the first time, fear appeared in my son's eyes. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mr. Whitmore, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Lucas looked around the courtroom at the cameras, the jury at me. You think this ends me, he said bitterly. I'm still your son. I met his gaze, tears blurring my vision. Yes, I said, and that's the tragedy. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. Lucas was sentenced to 25 years without parole. Vanessa received 15. Daniel Cross's assets were seized, his network dismantled. As Lucas was led away, he looked back one last time, not in anger, in confusion, as if he were finally seeing the consequences of his choices. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. But justice, I knew, wasn't the same as peace. Because even after truth wins, healing still demands its price. But as the courtroom emptied, I realized the hardest part wasn't his sentence. It was learning how to live after loving someone who tried to destroy me. The courthouse emptied slowly, as if even the walls needed time to process what had just happened. I stood on the steps for a long moment, breathing in air that felt different, lighter, cleaner. The storm clouds had broken apart, leaving behind a pale blue sky streaked with gold. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But none of it felt real. Justice had been served, and yet my hands were still shaking. Charles wrapped his coat around my shoulders without a word, shielding me from the noise. He didn't rush me, he never did. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. I thought about the question. "My son is going to prison for 25 years, I said quietly. "So no and yes," he nodded. "Both can be true." In the weeks that followed, the world kept turning, faster than I wanted it to. Lucas's case became a landmark example of elder financial abuse. Lawsuits followed. Assets were recovered, accounts frozen, trust restored. My name, once dragged through the mud, was slowly cleared, but redemption didn't come with applause. It came in quiet moments. The first night I slept without fear. The first morning I walked into my garden and felt peace instead of dread. The first time I realized I no longer checked the gates every time a car passed. Victor visited often, updating us on the aftermath. Vanessa's cooperation had exposed dozens of hidden crimes. Daniel Cross vanished again, but this time with nothing left behind. "He's powerless now," Victor assured me. "The legacy ends with Lucas." That should have comforted me. Instead, I found myself grieving. Not the man Lucas became, but the boy he once was. One afternoon, I visited the prison alone. Charles offered to come. I declined. Some journeys a mother must finish by herself. Lucas sat across from me in a gray uniform, older somehow, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I'm not here to give it," I replied honestly. "I'm here to let go." He looked down. I didn't know how to stop. I believed him. And yet I stood. "I loved you," I said. "That never changed, but love doesn't excuse destruction." He nodded, tears slipping free. When I left, I didn't look back. Because closure isn't about endings, it's about choosing where your life begins again. Months later, Charles and I stood in the same small gallery where we'd first met. The sunflower painting still hung on the wall. "I almost didn't come that day," I said with a soft smile. "I'm glad you did," he replied. We were married quietly, this time without secrecy. Friends attended. Laughter filled the room. No power plays, no shadows, just truth. I donated part of my recovered assets to organizations protecting the elderly from financial abuse. If my story could save even one person from being erased the way I nearly was, then the pain had meaning. On my 70th birthday, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window and a simple realization. I was still here. Not as a victim, not as a cautionary tale, but as a woman who survived betrayal and chose life anyway. I looked at my reflection and smiled. "They tried to bury me," I whispered, and forgot. I turned toward the future. I was still breathing.